While I have enjoyed the somewhat newer style of first-person horror games, I have still been missing the feeling of that older style of horror games that I grew up with that really kind of reached its pinnacle in the late 90s and early 2000s with games like the original Silent Hill, Rule of Rose, Haunting Grounds, and the Clock Tower series, the latter of which does seem to be at least some of the inspiration for the new game, Remothered, Tormented Fathers, that really does go back to that style of survival horror game that was so popular around the turn of the millennium. Remothered embraces that style in a way that I really enjoyed as somebody who grew up playing games like that, but it also didn't completely ignore modern sensibilities, for better and for worse. Apparently, Remothered originally started out as a personal fan tribute to the original Clock Tower. Remothered went through a few changes, and over the years, it has ultimately ended up with creator Chris Darrell teaming up with Stormmind Games to bring Remothered to fruition with the Unreal 4 engine, which turned out to be a great team, as Remothered Tormented Fathers is a fantastic throwback to classic survival horror, but also really fun and interesting in its own ways. I really appreciated the handful of specific nods to the Clock Tower series, as the game is extremely special to me and is one of my all-time favorites. Some references are more obvious than others, like the main character Rosemary Reed looking pretty much exactly like what a modern version of Helen Maxwell would look like. Also, there's some items like the oil can, which played a huge role in the original Clock Tower, and even an important character being named Jennifer, who was one of the main characters in Clock Tower as well. That one could potentially be a coincidence, but I don't think so. And the defense mechanic basically functioning the same way that it did in Clock Tower with panic mode, where you had to rapidly press square, but instead of only being able to do it 3 times, in Remothered, you can do it only if you happen to have a defense item like a knife or a screwdriver in your inventory, and those tend to break after 1 or 2 uses, which is a nice modernization of the same idea. It keeps you on edge and always on the lookout for new defense items, adding another layer of depth to what you have to keep in mind when you're roaming through the halls. Diversionary items and hiding places are also at your disposal, so keeping track of where those are is also key to getting Rosemary through the story alive. I think the balance between the various antagonists who stalk the halls and the items at Rosemary's disposal is crafted really well. I rarely felt powerful or completely screwed. I generally always felt like every encounter could go either way, which is what you want in a game like this. Remothered has been out on PC since January, but it also hit the Xbox One and PS4 a few weeks ago. Of course, I'm playing the PS4 version here, and I think it runs pretty well on the console, all things considered. I would have appreciated a higher frame rate considering how the graphics aren't exactly 2018 standards, but for me, frame rate is rarely a major problem, and even though it is a little lower than I would like, it is pretty consistent. Also, I didn't notice any load times, which is a nice touch and great for a game that relies on atmosphere as much as Remothered does. At first, the mansion does seem intimidating and impossible to memorize, but after an hour or 2 of exploring and going back and forth between floors, you will start to get the layout and it starts to make sense fairly quickly. Once you have a general idea of where stuff is and can really settle in and enjoy the horror, Remothered really shines. I haven't felt anything like the constant dread that this game made me feel in quite a while. Now, while I am glad to see a game go back to survival horror's roots in many ways, it does pay the price of emulating an older format by bringing some of the baggage of that older format with it. Moving Rosemary around is a little stiff, the tasks and objectives are pretty unimaginative, and you've probably seen them all before, and are so transparently only there to give you an excuse to have to go from one floor to the other. And like I said, the graphics aren't exactly great. There's also some weirdness with the audio of the pursuer sounding like he's closer to you than he is, and other times further away from you than he really is, and this can make some moments a little frustrating when you're trying to sneak through the halls and the audio balancing is misleading you by mistake. It doesn't happen often, but it happens enough for me to feel like I need to mention it.
What can you tell me about her?
I met her just a couple of times. She's usually out or locked in her bedroom when I'm here. Let's say they don't seem to get along.
The last complaint I would have that reminds me of the downside of older horror games is the camera. Most of the time it does work fine, and I do appreciate the ability to shift the camera to different sides of Rosemary at any time, but if you are being chased in a small room or a tight hallway, good luck trying to keep track of what the hell's going on. Those moments can fall apart really easily if you're not super careful with your movements, and I found that a little annoying. I also would have appreciated my interactions with the villain to be more Clock Tower-like, and I'll explain what I mean by that. In Remothered, your assailant generally has a pattern that they stick to and sometimes deviate from, making it kind of a stealth game. But in Clock Tower, you're free to roam wherever you want and try to figure out what you need to figure out, but Scissorman will just pop out sometimes, either because you did something to alert him, or sometimes it's just random, forcing you to work with what you have in that area with no notice at all. These are two distinctly different methods of interacting with the antagonist, and they generate two different types of fear. And I think the original Clock Tower method is superior, and I would have liked to have seen more of that in Remothered. Don't get me wrong, I like the stealth gameplay in Remothered, and I found it to be really scary and fun, but if Remothered was so inspired by Clock Tower, I'm a little sad that I didn't get to have those pop-out experiences that scared the bejesus out of me, and the dread of waiting for the next one to happen. Now, I don't want to spoil any of the major plot points here. I'll save that for my top 10 recap at the end of the year, as I'm pretty confident this game will be on that. But I will say that the story is pretty interesting overall, especially at the beginning, as Rosemary tries to press Dr. Felton on the disappearance of his daughter beyond the realms that he is comfortable with. It's obvious that he's hiding something, and there's a lot more to it than you might think. The story does get a little too complicated for its own good, in my opinion, but it's fun to experience the various twists and turns between the characters, and I was surprised with how many revelations they were able to squeeze into a story with only a few characters. Like I said, it does kind of get too complicated, but by the end of the game, the story is such a twisted mess of disturbing material that I couldn't help but be amused by the mayhem of it all. I'm honestly still not even sure I totally understand it all, though. I think I'll have to play it again. If you're a true horror junkie like me that grew up with Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or Clock Tower, or any of those games, I think Remothered is a no-brainer. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, it doesn't do very much at all to bring in gamers of different persuasions, and I would say it is priced appropriately at about half of what a normal AAA game would be. But if you are the type of gamer that finds this even a little interesting, I'm very confident in recommending it to you. From what I understand, the team behind this game does want to make a trilogy out of it too, so if you are interested, now's a good time to support it, and hopefully we'll get to see more of this twisted little world that Daryl Arts has created here.